We now return to Illinois Rising, presented by the Illinois Policy Institute, the radio show discussing the honest truth about Illinois policy and politics. Here's AM 560's Dan Proft.
Dan Proft back with John Tillman, President and CEO of the Illinois Policy Institute. John, interesting week in Illinois politics. Governor Rauner doesn't have enough problems dealing with supermajorities of Democrats in the General Assembly. Now he's got to deal with Jim Edgar feeling like people aren't paying attention to him, and so he needed to lecture Governor Rauner, suggesting that Governor Rauner is holding the state budget, quote-unquote, hostage, and he shouldn't be doing that because people are hurting.
Well, unfortunately, during Governor Edgar's tenure as governor, he not only held the people of Illinois hostage with a budget, he executed the budget that put us on the current plan we're on. It is called the Edgar ramp, and the whole spending arc that we are into was created by him, signed by him, in full partnership with Speaker Mike Madigan. So what Edgar is trying to do is make sure, please look over at this other guy, because I don't want anybody to finally fully comprehend that the entire problem we face is actually my fault.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I mean, what do you make of Edgar deciding to chime in? Is it just that? Is it trying to preserve his legacy? Is it he wants people to still come to him for his opinion on these matters? Is Rauner not paying enough attention to him?
I think it's all the above. He was pretty quiet for a long time, didn't have much to say. And now that we have a Republican governor back in office, Edgar has been perceived, in the punditry class, if you will, as the gold standard. All of that is a false narrative. None of that is true. But Edgar believes it about himself. He is the classic technocrat Republican governor. He has no core ideologically other than the merits of government. When Judy Bar-Topinka was running for governor in 2006, and I sat in a room and Governor Edgar was asked, what is the one redeeming virtue Judy Bar-Topinka, the late Judy Bar-Topinka, has as to why we should support her for governor? Governor Edgar's response was, well, she's from government and knows government. This is, of course, the one thing that disqualifies her if you are a person who actually thinks ideas matter. And
Governor Edgar also during the campaign, if I'm recalling correctly, promoted the idea of a tax increase.
Yes, and not only that, he signed and made permanent the tax increase that was originally put in temporarily back in his era.
Well, for more on this topic, we're now joined by Scott Reeder, Illinois News Network. He wrote a piece this week, Governor Edgar has no place lecturing Governor Rauner. Scott, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. It's great to be here.
And so what's your assessment in terms of why Governor Edgar should be seen and not heard?
Well, I've covered Jim Edgar for many, many years. I think first story I wrote on Jim Edgar was back in 1987. Okay. First thing I'll say, his personal life is very admirable. He's very much a family man. He's very conservative in how he conducts his personal life. Very admirable character. He did a wonderful job curbing some of the excesses of Jim Thompson when Edgar came on board and curbing spending. So those things about him are very admirable. But, when he addressed some of the state's long-term financial issues, he really fell short of the mark. I mean, one of the things that he did in negotiations with Mike Madigan is, states' pensions were grossly underfunded when Jim Edgar was in office. So they came up with a plan called the Edgar ramp, where essentially it works like this. Keep the pension payments low while I'm governor and make them higher when other people are governor. And, so that's essentially what happened, and they keep ramping up. And when they got high under Blagojevich and under Quinn, then they just started skipping, and they had a hard time, and it became just almost insurmountable for the state to make those payments. And now you're dealing with those issues of that were the seeds planted by Jim Edgar are coming to fruition.
Scott, let me, in fact, support your point here by quoting Jim Edgar at the time they signed the Edgar pension ramp back in the mid-'90s. Here's what he said, quote, "We had a time bomb in our retirement system that was going to go off in the first part of the 21st century. This legislation diffuses that time bomb." And, of course, the point you made is actually it only diffused it for the rest of his term, and it is blowing up all around us every day right now.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, basically, he didn't defuse the time bomb. He just reset the clock so it would explode later than it was going to at that point. And if anything, it made the situation worse because when you kick the can down the road like that, it doesn't solve anything. It just allows it the problem to continue to compile and become bigger and bigger when it when it happens.
And this is not going unnoticed by the rating agencies. This week, both Moody's and Fitch downgraded Illinois' credit rating yet again.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I hear Jim Edgar on this, but you got to remember, a lot of this is he bears some responsibility before. So does Jim Thompson. So does Rod Blagojevich for sure. So do a lot of former governors. And so and let's be very honest, it doesn't do a whole lot of good to be pointing fingers at this point. We've got to deal with the problem.
Well, it's also, I would suggest, it doesn't do any good to be reciting Mike Madigan talking points. I mean, Jim Edgar's been around for long enough. I'm pretty sure he understands how the legislative process works, and the $4 billion out of balance unconstitutional budget that was proposed by the General Assembly, by Mike Madigan and John Cullerton, that Rauner wouldn't sign, that is not a description of someone holding the budget hostage. That is someone saying, I'm not going to continue doing all the things that previous governors did that put us in this place, so I'm not going to be held hostage by Mike Madigan and John Cullerton's unconstitutional budget making.
Exactly. I mean, it's a sad situation. I think Illinois is really in a horrible, horrible situation as far as its budget. And it doesn't do a whole lot of good to be pointing fingers back and forth. We've got to deal with the issues. And one of the things that's, that Governor Rauner has kept bringing up is, I'm not going to sign a budget unless I'm not going to agree to a tax increase unless we have fundamental reform in how Illinois conducts itself. And, there's a lot of positive things you can say about Jim Edgar. I mean, like I said, he curbed a lot of the spending that was abuses that were happening under Thompson. But, Jim Edgar really wasn't a reformer. I remember first news conference I ever had with him. I came in, he was Secretary of State, and I said, Governor or Secretary, I remember I talked to some of your employees, and I said, what's their biggest beef with you? And they said that he's making us buy these fundraising tickets. And I held up some of the tickets and said, how do you explain yourself? How can you expect your own employees to be buying these tickets? The guy turned brick red, and he got really angry. And what we saw is he was carrying on a tradition that's happened in Illinois for many years with Alan Dixon and others that were Secretary of State before.
The corruption is well historically validated by all the participants of both parties, right?
And of course, his successor, George Ryan, ended up in prison because of the abuses in the fundraising of tickets. You had basically these poor, low-level state employees that were forced to buy these tickets, and suddenly people were coming in and wanting to buy CDL licenses get CDL licenses for their drivers, and these trucking companies were buying the tickets for them.
Yeah, let's. I want to, not to relitigate Edgar and Ryan too much and live in the past. Let's live in the present. I want to also go to something Christine Radogno, the Senate Republican leader, said this week when she was talking to a LaGrange Business Association group. We have to bite the bullet and pay it. Radogno is talking about a tax increase. The payments have to be made. It does put Illinois at a disadvantage. Radogno, according to the Tribune, said lawmakers will likely consider hiking the state income tax or taxing retirement income rather than increasing the state sales tax or instituting a tax on services. That's a bit of a sea change in the conversation I thought we were having in terms of what Governor Rauner is open to doing if he gets some structural reform from the General Assembly.
Well, yeah, and that's one of the things to be cognizant of. I mean, Republicans are not monolithic on this. There's different points of view on if a revenue increase needs to happen, where it should come from. I mean, just because we're talking about these things, even if we have so much to get accomplished, and I think, but the bottom line is, if you're going to have to make a horribly painful decision to raise taxes, you got to make sure that you're setting the groundwork that you're not going to have to come back and raise them again.
Scott, the question though I have for you on that is why is it Republicans leaders are always negotiating with themselves in public and taking away their advantage by making statements like that, whereas the Democrats play hardball and understand that information is currency, and lack of information, you hold your cards close, gives you greater leverage? Why is it historically it always seems the Republicans are the first ones to put their cards on the table and say to their opponent, here are my cards, let's discuss how I should play my hand?
Well, I've heard lots of jokes about that over the years. One is that Republicans eat their young. It tends to be a party that has a hard time being unified.
I like for the young to eat the old.
I don't mind a lack of unification. I would just like intelligence in negotiating in public.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, exactly. I mean, I think that they... no disagreement there.
All right, Scott Reeder, Managing Editor at Illinois News Network. Scott, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye.